Carly is a feminist, Marxist therapist, and an art activist with a background in the voluntary sector and years of experience in private practice. Currently, she works as a creative arts therapist for a young people's social mental health charity in Bristol. She's also a member of the Red Clinic, a collective of left-wing therapists committed to promoting radical approaches to counseling and psychotherapy with the goal of making therapy accessible to the working classes and the oppressed. She holds qualifications in counseling, sociology, politics, and art, which have enabled her to transcend, though she rejects the concept, her working class roots and feels smug. She believes that the personal really is political, which is a key thread that runs throughout all of her work. So a huge thank you to Carly for coming and spending the evening with us, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you very much to you guys for giving me a platform for this, because I think we were discussing briefly beforehand that this is a subject that doesn't really get much airtime if we talk about it actually at all. So yeah, you've introduced me beautifully, so I'm not going to do that bit. Okay, so good. I'm just going to share my slides, and then because I just said we'll sort of open it up for questions nearer the end. Okay. So can I just check people can see that okay? And let me just put this up. Cool. Excellent. Okay. So yeah, so I decided that I wanted to talk about this for many reasons, but one is because I just think it's something that we don't discuss enough. If at all, actually. So the other thing maybe to mention is that I'm also a tutor at a couple of colleges at the moment, and I've had experience at this point of lecturing and tutoring at various institutions. And what I've noticed across the board is that this isn't a subject that comes up, even in the sort of mandatory kind of tick box difference and diversity days. This still is not a discussion that's being had, and the reason I think that's problematic is because there are plenty of working class clients out there kind of wanting and needing therapy. And also because I think as therapists, we hold a lot of power in the counselling room just by default of the fact that we are therapists. And I think if you add on to that kind of class, adds other layer, and I think it's dangerous if we're actually, I think it's harmful if we're not conscious, if we're not aware of that, or at least willing to be. Okay. So I've called this the neglected characteristic because if we look at the Equality Act 2010, which personally I think is a great piece of legalization, we see 9 protected characteristics. Okay, so we've got here like age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion, and so on. Okay, and the idea of this act is really to protect people from discrimination and to affirm people's kind of human rights in the sort of social sphere, in the workplace, and so on. But there's no mention of class whatsoever. Okay, and this kind of blows my mind. I don't understand it whatsoever. And I think especially you know, having traveled a lot at this point in my life, it confuses me even more, because I think Britain's got quite a heightened class system. Actually, it's really sort of embedded in our culture, so I don't get why it's not on that in law, basically. And I think it's important that we're aware of kind of law and the broader societal kind of response to class, because I think that's also mirrored in our counselling trainings in our institution and in the counselling room. Okay. So I guess I just want to share a little bit about my background, because that feels relevant. And so for me, I guess this issue, as well as being kind of academic and me caring about my profession and me caring about clients, it's also really deeply personal to me. So this is an image here of the area in which I grew up. Okay, so it's not the exact street where I grew up, because I thought about that, and I thought, like, I don't think my mom would be too happy with me putting a picture of her house on the internet to loads of people. But it just kind of gives you an idea, right? And I remember growing up and like just not having like basic stuff. Like, I don't know, my mum couldn't afford stuff like heating. Sometimes we couldn't afford stuff like food. As soon as I could, I had to get a job, even though I was at school and I was working however many hours just so I could get a bus ticket to get to school, because my mum couldn't afford that. Okay. And for me, that's had a real impact on my life, meaning that there's been like several barriers for me to have to get through, and a bit of a fight to get to where I've kind of ended up. And one place that I really experienced those kind of obstacles was on my counselling training. So my experience of counselling training is that, how do I put it? There wasn't much kind of infrastructure that was there kind of to support me. And I mean that in a material sense. I really struggled. Like, when I first started my counselling training, I think I was like on the dole initially. Um, and and then after that, I was working night shifts, I think in a mental health hospital at the time, just trying to like working on minimum wage, trying to get like enough money to kind of get through. So I had, I think, a quite different experience to my peers. And the other thing for me is that I just felt really alienated. Like, I just felt like I'd kind of walked into this place that like, well, this different world that made absolutely no sense to me, where people were like speaking this kind of different language, I guess, kind of in a way they were. So I think just two things to be mindful of, because I don't think I'm alone in that experience, is there's the material reality of the obstacles that like trainee counselors might face, but there's also like the cultural barriers as well that people have to get through that I sometimes think are quite unseen. And I just want to like read out this quote from Nifton, and so it says, "Poverty is both a cause of mental health problems and a consequence." So poverty is both a cause of mental health problems and a consequence. And I'm going to focus in on this bit. It says poverty is both a cause of mental health problems, because what we do know is there's a really strong correlation, okay, between poverty and poor mental health. Okay. And what it seems absolutely bizarre to me is that even though we know that to be true, that's what research and evidence suggests, people from poorer economic backgrounds also have the least access to therapeutic support or mental health support, right? So something's kind of gone wrong in the system here, in my view. Okay. So I think in order to start to talk about class, I think it's also important that we have some sort of definition of class, even if a sort of like vague definition of class. Okay. I remember when I was doing my master's course, I was writing about working class artists, and a well-meaning like professor of mine said to me, "Well, Carly, class is completely subjective nowadays. Like, class is a term, it doesn't really mean what it used to mean, if it kind of exists at all." And he was very under the impression that the middle class and the working class had sort of become one entity. Personally, I don't buy that. I think there are quite big distinctions between the working class experience and the middle class experience. And I think there are certain elements that can contribute to how we understand class, which I just kind of want to go through here. So first off, education level. So it used to be said that if you had like a BA, pretty much that's it. You went from working class to you graduated to a middle class. I can't say I believe that's true anymore. I think, certainly since kind of the Blair sort of red label sort of government, there's been a kind of inflation of education, I would suggest. And actually now often what's needed is an MA or postgraduate education at least, which can be really hard for people from working class backgrounds to access, even if with scholarships, even if they get bursaries. Okay. So that means already that working class people often can't get to like the top jobs, promotions, or whatever. Okay, so there's already limitations in their way even before they start. And also, if you've got someone who's like first in their family to go to university, you know, that they're going to have a very different experience to someone who comes from a family where it's the norm to go to university, or where generations of people have gone to university. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, people are from a background where it's the norm are going to understand that system so much better. Okay. Income level also, I think, matters. I think sometimes when we talk about class, this can be like the first thing that people kind of latch onto. And I hope you can see that actually it's not the only thing, it's like a component. Okay. So, you know, of course, someone that's earning, I don't know, let's say like £80,000 a year is going to have a very different experience probably of the world than someone that's earning 13,000 and has got like 4 kids to bring up, right? And you know, people say this in a really well-meaning way. Sometimes they say, well, like, money doesn't buy happiness. I gently disagree with that. I see the sentiment. I see where people are coming from, but you know, money buys like the basics, and it buys survival, if you like. If you don't have a roof over your head, or you don't have adequate food or whatever, life is going to be harder. Social status and occupation. So I've put these two together because I think they're often interlinked. But like, let's say, for example, you've got, I don't know, a dinner party, and you've got one person at the dinner party that's like a lawyer, and you've got someone else that's a care worker. Instinctively, I think most people would give more sort of reverence and respect to the first person, right? I don't think that's right, but I think as a society, we often afford people that we perceive to have higher social status, or more education, or more expertise, as kind of better, if you like, and put them on more of a pedestal. Also, in terms of occupation, when we're talking about the working class, we're often talking about, not always, but we're often talking about sort of manual labor jobs. And we're also, you know, we're talking about jobs usually that people have a lot less autonomy over. And, you know, I can speak for myself now in the role that I'm in. Like, I'm very fortunate. Like, if I want to turn up to work in my pajamas, pretty much I can. Maybe not all the time, most of the time. Like, I have a lot of flexibility. I can kind of decide my hours. I can decide my holidays, all that kind of stuff. I have to say that's also because I'm self-employed mainly. Not every middle-class person maybe has that experience, but you get my gist. There's a bit more autonomy over the work than perhaps working class people have, where actually they might be subject to sort of shift work, or told when to come in, or have to work late, often for very little kind of pay as well. And social capital kind of comes into class as well. So I can just give an example of this from my own experience. So when I started entering into sort of the middle class world, what I noticed, which seemed quite unfair to me actually, was that doors seemed to start opening up. And doors started to open up because I knew the right people. So for example, I recently got invited to go and lecture at like a university, and it was great, and I had a good time. But people said to me, oh, like, that's amazing, like, what an achievement, how incredible. What they didn't know is that actually I'd kind of got that gig because I knew someone who knew someone who knew someone. So you see what I mean? And working class people often won't have the networks. They won't have that kind of those resources or opportunities. So what I want you guys to do now, because I think it's really important, is just to have a chance to reflect upon how you understand or how you identify your class. Okay. And like I said, I think a definition, some kind of idea of what class is important, because otherwise we can't have a discussion about it. But also to some degree, this is really personal and subjective. Okay. So there's no real kind of concrete right or wrong. But I do want you guys just to notice if there's any defensiveness or discomfort that comes up. There might well be, and that's okay. So I just invite you to just to sit with that. Okay, but yeah, just thinking about your own background and maybe your own experience of counselling training, um, and how you sort of identify kind of now in the present as well. So just going to give you about, I'd say about 5 minutes, guys, just by yourself, just to do that. So I think we're just give you a couple more seconds and then we'll kind of move on. Okay. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to it. So I'm just going to read this quote here. So by Smith. So if the personal really is political, then it seems ironic that a profession that focuses on the personal oftentimes actively separates itself from the political. Okay, so I'm just going to read that again. If the personal really is political, then it seems ironic that a profession that focuses on the personal oftentimes actively separates itself from the political. Okay, and this is just something I've noticed in the counselling profession, sort of overall, that of course, you know, we put the emphasis often on client autonomy, on client responsibility, and all of that is really important. But also, we really want to enter into our clients' world. We really want to offer them that unconditional positive regard and empathy. Then how can we do that if we're not understanding their context? If we're not understanding this massive part of their kind of lived experience and what they're coming with. Okay. And so I think it's really important that we understand the barriers that some people might kind of experience in terms of accessing therapy. Okay. So the first one just to mention sort of session times, and this might seem really basic, but actually I think this can be a real kind of stumbling block for people. So, and this is something I come across, and there's no judgment on by the way of this issue. A lot of therapists like to work the sort of 9 to 5. Okay, a lot of working class people actually work outside of those hours, so they might be working late, they might be doing shift work, so they, you know, they might not be able to commit to a kind of a regular therapy appointment, especially if it's within their working hours. And like I said before, they tend to have maybe less kind of autonomy to be able to kind of negotiate with like bosses or managers or whatever to get time off to have therapy in the first place. Okay, and I mentioned this as well because I've heard counselors say this to me before, where they go, oh, you know, well, it just means that they're not committed to the work, and if they were really committed, they would get time off. And I just want to say emphatically, actually, practically, for some people, it's just not possible. Okay, so just to give an example, I had someone I was working with ages back now, and she had just left school. Family were kind of very poor, like she was living in the living room, she didn't even have a room, and she'd got a job doing kind of like fast food. And in fast food, notoriously is well known for kind of shift work and changing schedules. So the way that we did it was that she had a appointment with me, and she would stick with that appointment for a month, and then when her schedule kind of changed and her shift changed, we would revisit it and review it. And I know that every therapist is in the position to be able to kind of do that, and I know that obviously we need to factor in things like therapy rooms and stuff like that, but it is something I think to be mindful of. Travel costs, I do think so this can be a barrier for people, but I do think sort of maybe post-COVID, it's perhaps less of a barrier, because now we can offer people the option for online working. But I think maybe the important thing there is just like to hold in mind that actually for some people that might be the more sort of practical alternative than them paying for a train ticket or bus ticket or whatever to get over to you. Location, I think is also important. So I'm just going to give myself as an example here, but when I was kind of like in my kind of late 20s, I decided that there was like a particular kind of therapy that I wanted to kind of access and get, but I was living in a seaside town in Devon, right? Which is not the most kind of resource place in the world and has quite a strong sort of working class community. And I made the conscious choice to move to Bristol, partly so I could access the therapy that I needed at an affordable rate. Okay. So there is a bit of a postcode lottery sometimes that goes on, and actually it's often those locations where people kind of need therapy the most, where they're least able to kind of access it, or if they can access it, and there's perhaps charities or services that set up, the waiting lists are just, I don't know, sometimes we're talking 1-2 years long, right? So sometimes there's just not the provision. Okay, money. So what I'm not suggesting today is that everyone sort of like just puts down their fees or whatever, and there's no judgment for me on this one. I think this is a really complicated one. I don't know necessarily what the answer is, but I think we need to just put it out there that private therapy is inaccessible to a lot of people. My rate at the moment is about £60 an hour. Okay, most working class people can't afford that. For most working class people, that's like their food shop, I don't know, Lidl for whatever, or Sainsbury's for the week. And I think it doesn't help, and I hear counsellors doing this, where we shame people as well for not being able to kind of afford therapy. Again, goes back to this idea, well, they don't value it enough, they're not committed enough. I think the practical reality is that it's, for some people, that is just beyond what is affordable for them. Okay. And of course there are like like I said, there are charities and other organizations and schools or universities that might be able to hold people to some extent. But my experience, and I'm speaking from someone that works in a charity myself, is that charities are inundated and often not able to offer the therapy that people actually need. So even if they do get in the door, it might be more like, oh, here's 6 sessions of CBT. I'm not necessarily knocking that, but that's not a one fits all. Okay, so there's a real lack of choice for working class people, for working class clients. Childcare is another thing I think to consider. So if you got someone that's like a single working class mum, and she's going to come and have therapy for you, like where's she meant to find the money for childcare? Okay. This might be also a similar question in terms of like training as well. I know we're talking about clients mainly here, but well, certainly when I've trained people in the past, I've had like single mums, especially who've been like, well, you know, how am I meant to be here for the whole day? Well, how am I meant to afford for like my child to be looked after? So I think that's also something just to be kind of aware of. These last two I nearly put in the same box, but they didn't fit. But this one about feeling misunderstood or judged, I think is quite a big one. So I have a friend of mine, and she's generally quite open-minded. She's gone through like a lot in her life, from quite like a poor background. We kind of grew up around each other really. And I said to her one day, I was like, you know, why haven't you kind of considered therapy? Because obviously being a therapist, I'm totally biased and a big advocate for it. And her response was, well, Kylie, what would be the point? She said, so I would go to therapy and I'd be met with someone that wouldn't understand my life experience. Like, how am I meant to open up and talk to someone who doesn't get it? And I tried to convince her for a while, like otherwise. And then I thought about it a bit more and I was like, she's got a point. Okay. Because one of the things that we know and research tells us is that actually similarity between therapist and client kind of helps in terms of kind of outcomes and how successful therapy is. But actually a lot of working class clients really, really struggle. I know this from talking to various people, to find someone who's got a similar lived experience to them. So often for them, it feels like there's a piece of the puzzle kind of missing. And also this experience of feeling like they're being judged. I mean, I had a client just like in the pandemic, and he had when I was working in a charity, and he'd started working with a woman who was way more experienced than I was, way more qualified than I was, and he didn't like working with her, and he'd been signposted to me, and I couldn't quite get my head around what hadn't worked. And he fed back to me and he said, well, Kylie, I felt like she was looking down at me from her parapet, and I feel like you're a bit more like down to earth. And so he wasn't explicitly naming class, but I think there was something implicit there. I think there was a sense that maybe there was something that I kind of got, that I kind of understood. And this again, going back to that kind of power imbalance, right? That I think sometimes working class people can instinctively feel with therapists that are maybe from a different class to them. Okay. So moving forwards, I mean, I wish I did have the answer and the solutions, and unfortunately I don't. But I've got a hope that we can make progress and we can perhaps start going in a different direction. So I think the first thing, and this is what I've invited you guys to do today, is just maybe to have some time to reflect upon your own class identity, okay, and also how this might be experienced by our clients. So yeah, I think the first thing, we talk about this a lot in therapy, don't we, is that self-awareness. And like I said, for some reason, class doesn't seem to come into that in our trainings, but I think it's really important that we start to reflect on this a bit more. Being aware of our own judgments and prejudices. I think sometimes when we talk about working class people, this can kind of go off one or two ways often. I think sometimes you've got this sort of caricature of the working class, like chavlas, say, like very sort of like swearing and polite, got like I don't know, your sort of Vicky Pollard type character, right? Or on the other hand, we have this kind of romanticized idea of the working class. I don't know if anyone here was ever into it. I'm just gonna hold my hands up in a minute, but I used to be really into like Pop Idol, X Factor. And and in X Factor you often get that sort of rags to riches kind of story. Someone comes in the door, they've had a really difficult life, and they've grown up on an estate where there's been like a ton of violence, where they haven't had enough, and then lo and behold they've come really, really successful and sell 1 million records, and everyone's really happy for them. Okay, so just being mindful of that. So it's like social judgments on working class people, and also kind of our own internal judgments, right? And we're human. I think we all have them to different degrees. Watching our language. So this is just like a personal bugbearer of mine. So when we talk about self-care, I just think we have to be really careful about how we present that one, especially. So I was in a meeting the other day where this happened actually, and people were talking about what they did for self-care, and I'm totally paraphrasing it here, but it was something along the lines of like, before breakfast, I like to take a nice mindful walk, and then I like to do a bit of yoga and some breathing. Okay. And that's lovely. That's great. And I'm not knocking that. But actually, for some working class people, if their day starts at 7 o'clock in the morning and their shift is until 7 o'clock at night, and they've got things to fit into that, they haven't got time for yoga before breakfast and a bit of mindful breathing, right? So I think it's about being sensitive to the fact that working class people tend to have less resources than middle class people. And one resource I would say that working class people probably have less of as well is time. Okay, so when we're talking to clients and we're like, yeah, you need to make time to look after yourself, to do this or to do this, just have it in your awareness that time equals money. And if you're getting paid less than a living wage, for example, you're going to have a lot less of it. So I think tailoring our language around kind of self-care, and also being aware that, like, how do I put it? Not suggesting things that have necessarily got like monetary value as well. I've had people before suggest to clients, oh, it'd be really great if you could just go to Lush and get yourself a nice bath bomb. By the way, Lush bath bombs are really expensive. So thinking about stuff like that as well. What are you offering to your clients? Yeah. The other kind of bugbearer of mine that I think we need to watch in terms of our language, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but this conversation about value. And I think as therapists, and this is something I've had to wrestle with myself, it's really important that, of course we value what we do. We give it its due worth. And one of ways we might do that is through kind of money, because we have to be able to live and exist, right? And look after ourselves in order to look after other people. I think that's an important conversation. Where I struggle is where people seem to put the same standards onto working class people as to middle class clients. So what do I mean by that? Where the concept of value is not proportional, right? Where people say, so for example, a working class person that comes to therapy, let's say they're paying you £25 a week. To them, that really is valuing the work. Because to them, that's probably a really significant amount of their income, and the same that would be to someone else that was earning maybe 50,000 and giving you 60, right? But what I hear sometimes from counselors makes me cringe every time, is that people who are poorer or on benefits or whatever don't really value the work. It's, if they really valued it, they'd find the money. My question to that be from where? So just being aware of that. Okay. And I think also a way for us to kind of start moving forward, and again, I don't know how we do this exactly, but I think it's part of the picture, is to make class a part of our training courses. Okay, like I said from the start, this often isn't part of I don't know about other people, definitely was part of the curriculum of my training course, right? So when we're talking about difference and diversity and beyond, actually, we need to be talking about class. Okay, when we're talking about power and privilege and intersectionality, we need to also be talking about class. Okay. So advocating to making the profession and training courses more accessible for those from lower economic backgrounds. Okay. Because if we can do that, then we're also giving our clients like more choice in terms of who they can choose. So it's of benefit to the public as well as to ourselves and to our profession, right? So maybe something about reconsidering how courses are funded. So my sense is that we are sort of gradually, slowly going into a more positive direction, and that I think there's more courses now that you can get student funding for that kind of qualify you than perhaps in the past. But and I know this because I've worked in them. The majority of training institutions in counselling are still private colleges, and actually it's really difficult to get funding for them. When I was doing my training, even and that was at a private college, I think there were some bursaries that BACP were doing at the time, and I think it was something like £500 for the 2 years, and my training was like 7,500 plus. So that doesn't even barely cut it. Okay, and I think also just thinking about the additional expenses, we've got supervision, which is what, 75 pounds an hour, for example, in Bristol it is. You've got private therapy, and also like the free labor that goes into counselling trainings as well. I think that really seriously needs to be addressed. I've got students of mine who get very excited about, I'm going to do my 2-year diploma and then I'm going to be ready to get out there. And, there's sometimes a bit of disappointment where they realize that placement is probably going to take a bit longer than they thought, but also that in order to get employability, in order to get a job in the sector, often there's an expectation that they get a 450 sort of post-qualifying hours. Of course, not always, and perhaps private practice is an option, but still, that's a lot of kind of volunteering. And that's really hard for people who maybe don't have like support from families, who don't have financial or material resources, right? So I really think we need to examine how we set up our training courses. And adding to the research base, I mean, I think there's already like a lack of kind of qualitative research in the counselling profession, but there's barely anything on the issue of class. So if we've got any sort of researchers or academics here, please get on to this one. Okay. So I'm going to open up for sort of questions and stuff in a moment. Before we do, I just want to share a quote. Okay. This is Vicky Pollard, who I mentioned before, who I feel like Little Britain's now seriously going out of fashion because it's not particularly how to put it, culturally sensitive. But I think this caricature, and it is a caricature, kind of conveys, I think, what some people think of, whether rightly or wrongly, I think wrongly, when they think of working class people. So going back to that idea of the working class being either sort of demonized or romanticized. And I think this is what this quote is getting at. So it goes, the C word is not chav, but class. The answer is neither to demonize nor celebrate aspects of working class life, but to extend choice in every way, culturally and politically, by any means necessary. And what I really like about what she's saying here is she's talking about choice. And I think that's for people coming into the profession, but also for clients trying to access therapy. I think for me, this is one of the things that is kind of gapingly missing, is this element of kind of choice. And if we can open that up, then maybe we can start to see things change. Okay, so I'm just going to stop. Okay. So does anyone have any, I'm going to open up the questions now. So does anyone have any questions or comments that they just want to kind of like share?
Feel free to, yeah, raise your Zoom hand. Just wanting to say there's been a lot of action in the chat, so we can go back afterwards and read it. Carly, I think you'll be, yeah, quite pleased to see how engaged people have been. So I'll pass it over to Laura to come in, and then Omar.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, so Laura, Lau, your
Oh, sorry, I was just trying to unmute. It's not a question, it's just a comment. I just wanted to say thank you, and I've found this evening, like I go to loads and loads of different seminars, and I found it really quite emotional, because I absolutely agree it's not spoken about enough, and like all of the barriers you spoke about, but even when those barriers are overcome and people are in training, I think the culture of it's so alienating. There's so much additional trauma that happens, and I am like lucky to be in a place where I'm on a doctorate training that's paid for by the NHS, but I'm in my 3rd year, and in my own therapy today, named that if I was to be offered this and back at the beginning, I'm not sure I'd take it again. Not because of the work, I work with children and adolescents because I love the work, but because of the dynamics and the hierarchy and the abuse of power, and the fact that certain groups of people get privileged over other groups of people, and it's disgusting. And it is disgusting that it's happening in the very teachings of what we're meant to be working with to support mental health. And I think I was a little bit naive and illusioned like before I went into it, and I don't know what to do with it. So I just wanted to share that I found this really, really heartfelt, and thank you.
Good. Thank you so much for kind of sharing your own kind of experience. Sorry you've had that experience. I'd want to say I'm surprised and shocked. I'm really not. And I think you touched on like a reality that even like, I think that's what I was trying to get at before, you know, like even if we've got the material means, if there's funding, whatever, there's still like a cultural thing that's missing, and ignorance in the way that trainings are kind of presented, and that power thing as well. I think you have every right to feel annoyed and angry about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Omar, I think, is next.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carly. It's probably one of the best presentations I've seen for a long time, actually, because it's really realistic. I come from a working class background, and I can remember doing my training, a diploma in counselling, going back about 11, 12 years ago. And these were the issues which I faced. I was really struggling financially, because on the course I had to have 20 hours of therapy. And I actually got that through the NHS. I couldn't afford to do it. I was really, really struggling. And because there was certain students on the course, there was like a form of jealousy and bullying. We have to pay for it, but you didn't have to pay for it, and you was able to get your 20 hours counselling. So it was like, I felt really alien. And I put a comment actually in the chat saying I was a working class person who was trying to be middle class. And it felt alien. It felt really alien.
Yeah.
But it was great to hear you talking about these issues and raising about class distinction, because I don't think they come up very often at all. Yeah. But that was my experience at that time. But yeah, I just reflected back, and I just thought to myself, I'm middle class now. But at the time I was working class, and I was struggling a lot. And I just remember looking at other people and just thinking to myself, like, you know, you haven't walked in my shoes, so you can't really tie my shoelaces.
Right. So there was a real like a real kind of disconnect to your actual experience, and see that there might be like a genuine difference. Sorry, my internet connection kind of went.
It's all right, it was mine. I just wanted to say thank you anyway, and it really resonated with me, and I'm really glad that it was brought up, and yeah, excellent presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. It means a lot to me.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think is it Sylvia? And also just wanting to say we have until 5, but the questions can continue after our little break. So I'm just aware we have a few hands up and want to get to all of them.
Sylvia, hello.
Hi, hello. So lovely to see you here, Carly. Thank you so much for tonight. It was so enlightening, and I just loved participating in, especially kind of the reflection on our own class, right? I mean, you know that I work with minority groups and people coming from different backgrounds. And as a liberation practitioner, I guess I have a question. My curiosity is, and I bring this from, I guess, my personal experience of studying and being in this space in the UK, where a class is much more visible for somebody who comes to the UK from outside, but it's also possibly irrelevant, and because in some other countries it doesn't exist or exists in different formats. So you know, power operates in every society differently. My curiosity is, as a therapist yourself and as a tutor, how do you see people from other countries react to class? What comes up for them? What are the challenges that clients have? What are the challenges that students have who come from different countries and study in the UK? Is there anything we could be aware of that you can think of?
It's a very big, good question as well. So
Thank you.
yeah, no, I mean, my personal perspective is I think class exists in all countries. But yeah, I think it's got like different names, and I think sometimes, this is just a personal opinion, I think there's something quite a bit insidious about how we deal with class in this country. Like, it's such a massive thing, but yeah, it's so kind of under the carpet. So I've lost your face out. So the question was, how would I, as a tutor and with my clients, deal with like people from
What do
different
you
countries?
see come up? I mean, do your students actually talk about it at all? Because that's exactly what you're saying. I absolutely agree. In every country, there is some definition of different groups in a society, whether we call it class or inheritance or whatever it is. But do you see this being a topic? Because in my experience, for example, class is pretty obvious as an observation, but sometimes it's really difficult to bring it in because the majority of the group who are local will not talk about it or find it uncomfortable to talk about it.
Same. So, do you know what I think? Is thinking of it through an international lens as well. I mean, this is my experience as a tutor. So I teach online on a level 3 course, and I find people there from kind of all over the world, and people. Yeah, I mean, they talk about it because I make them talk about it, I suppose. But it's really interesting because when actually it gets to like level 4, or it gets to the professional qualification, what I usually find with counselling institutions is you find any sort of international voices, not any, but usually kind of peter out actually during the selection process. They seem to kind of disappear, and you're left with a sort of white British majority. That's been certainly my experience of counselling trainings.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's Victoria next, and then maybe we'll go to Tom. We'll take a break, then have Elaine, and I think it was Tabitha had a real hand waving. So we can come back
Real
to
hand.
that. Come back to that after our short break. Go ahead, Victoria.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi there. Hi, just trying to unmute. Hi there, Carly. Just here to support you. This has been amazing and just fantastic presentation. And completely just feels like it's been such a long time coming. So I represent the Working Class Psychotherapists Association, and we've been going for about 2.5 years, 3 years now. We meet monthly online, and we talk about these issues, and we like to think we provide a home for these issues. And we've got members of all different ages and stages of practice. And I've popped my email address in the chat if anybody is interested in getting in touch with me around it. I like to think that we hold a sort of an umbrella for over the diversity of classed experience, because, as you were saying, Carly, it's so different, isn't it? And I was at another conference on class earlier today, and people there were saying, you know, some people were saying, I'm middle class now, and when I was in my working class background, I didn't want to remain there, and it was all about social mobility, where there are other psychotherapists, counsellors, practitioners like me who are I'm very grounded in my working class identity, and that's still me who I am. So there is such a lot of diversity just in that experience of class in of itself. So just wanted to thank you and say and support you and support everyone else who started talking about this, because it's been a long and lonely road, it feels like. It's my 30th year of practice now, and it's just been great to hear this coming up now and having a moment starting from about 10 years ago. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and Victoria, I want to thank you because I'm aware of the work that you guys do, and I can totally vouch for it. I think it's wonderful. And I think, and I resonate with that feeling of it kind of being a lonely journey sometimes, and it's been really nice to connect with you this year and like see other people here as well in this space, like that we're not alone. We might be in a minority, I think we are, but we're not all by ourselves in this.
So we're all about improving representation, aren't we now? And solidarity and collective power. So thanks.
Thank you, Victoria. And also, if there's any sort of website or link that we can put on the Therapy and Social Change website to your group, we'd be more than happy to do that. So please send a link over if that is welcome. Tom, please come in.
Great, thanks. I'm a social worker in Montreal in Canada. Been doing mental health for 25 years or something. I'm so grateful that this is being brought up. Yay, hello, Cassandra, fellow Canadian. I think it's extremely important, probably way more important than the usual liberal identity politics stuff of like, oh, what's your ethnic thing? As if everybody is from the same level of material security, especially now with the right-wing swing everywhere, pretty much, where we've forgotten. I mean, what's interesting, just listening to how we're talking about it, is even when somebody who has come from impoverished background where you got to work insane hours at shit jobs and precarious, dangerous positions, you might lose your housing, etc., and you somehow made it work to have a better income and maybe a unionized job and maybe some good conditions, you're still not out. You have a middle class standard of living, but you're not the bourgeoisie. You don't own capital, right? And we've forgotten that's what class means. You're the owner class or you're everybody else, right? And I think we really need to come back to seeing it that way, in the sense of like, all right, like how do we make sure that we're shoring up the gains that are slipping away and have been slipping away since Tony Blair there and since Trudeau father here. The States is fucked. And other places are just slipping into fascism completely. But how do we push more an agenda of the working class, including the managerial and the caregiving classes, or positions, let's say, actually take control material-wise, right? And if we don't have that as our agenda, we see what happens, right? We see what happens when we have social democracies that are still like, okay, we'll have a certain peace for a few generations when the economy is going well, when the capitalist economy is going well, but as soon as they don't, out the window go those compromises to the working class, right? Even in the Nordic countries, right? So it's really, we need to get beyond, and you were naming this in your presentation, we need to get beyond seeing class as a cultural thing, like another cultural thing, as a material resource problem. And that's the only way to actually make any sense of most of it's not just politics of recognition, it's politics of recognition of material precarity and exploitation.
Yeah. And I like the word you just threw in there at the end. That idea of like exploitation, and actually the working class are the exploited class, because they're the producers of sort of labor. Like they don't own labor, they don't own capital. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's great to have an international audience with us. I'm aware of the time, so normally we would take a break at 6 for about 5 minutes just to kind of get up, grab a cup of tea, and then we come back at 5 minutes past. But Elaine, did you want to come in before 6 and feedback?
If you like, mine's really very quick, really, I think. Anyway, it's a fantastic presentation, Carly. Thoroughly enjoyed it, right up my street. But why do we think, because I've socially mobilized from a very poor working class to middle class, why do you think it is that we wouldn't let the working class part of us go?
Elaine, sorry, could you just repeat that last bit for me?
Yeah, just that I notice in myself and others, even when we socially mobilize ourselves into middle class, we won't let the working class part of us go.
I mean, I can only speak for myself, but to me, like being a working class, like, is a massive part of my identity. Do you know what I mean? I've spent more time being working class than I have done in the sort of, I would say, kind of lower middle class. So why don't we let it go, even if with social mobility? Because I think it maybe goes back to that thing. It's more than just money. It's all those kind of other things that kind of come into it as well. So I mean, personally for myself, I just find it really hard to kind of separate out. And like when I go home and I see my mum and like my brothers and sisters, I remember where I'm from. I'm not escaping that. So it's very much a part of me. And in a way, I mean, I don't know how this is, but like, for example, if you live in like one country for a really long time and then you come to the UK, even though you've been here for like maybe the majority of your life, you're not necessarily, do you know what I mean? That country that you came from is still very much a part of who you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, someone says, Marianne says, early life has a big impact on who we are. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.